Welcome everyone to another webinar with Advisicon. Today we're going to get into the intro to Microsoft 365 Copilot Studio. This is one of many videos that we're doing to help people understand how to leverage Copilot going forward to optimize their business. Our focus today is going to be on using SharePoint as a data source, and that's kind of important as we think about how often we work with SharePoint. So, of course, if you haven't met us before, we're Advisicon, and we've been around for 30 plus years, focused on business transformation and technology. So we aren't here to sell licensing. We're here to help you figure out how to get more and do more with less. So basically, certainly step over some of the pitfalls that Jeff and I bump our heads into as we work through tech. With me today is Jeff Post. And Jeff is one of our senior architects, a longtime friend and colleague. We have wrestled through project server, all the iterations of this, and Jeff has been hyper-focused on learning and simulating how Copilot will begin to optimize business. So Jeff's going to lead us through some of this as well in the Microsoft stack. Today, we're going to jump right through, we'll talk about practical requirements. Like if you're going to go create a custom Copilot, what are some things that you need to be aware of? And what does that look like in terms of skills and licensing and other elements that go there? Again, our focus will be around today, focused on SharePoint internal, basically a SharePoint site as a data repository. In fact, specifically, we're going to talk about HR. So we're going to show you this. We do try and keep the technical piece of this fairly light because the focus is exactly on stepping through each of the different elements of like how to build these things, what you might run into. And again, check out our other videos. We've got plenty of other things for you to play with and learn from. But we're going to learn how to do that. And then we'll talk lightly about manual authentication. There's a whole other learning component around this. It's worthy of its own separate webinar, and I think that's important, but it's really something that you'll need to understand. And so we'll talk about some of the pieces that go with that, and then just some of our observations. So Jeff, are you ready to sink your teeth into this?
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. So let's dig into a little bit about the requirements. And I think you had some other information you wanted to share with folks as they're learning, and we've been learning over the last year and a half. Go ahead.
Yeah. If you're getting started with Copilot Studio, here's two great links. One to learn more about it, one to try it out for yourself, which will get you set up. We're not going to really try and sell you Copilot Studio or teach you how to use it completely or anything, but we're going to deal with a special use case that you should find interesting and hopefully very useful after you do start using Copilot Studio. Okay, so basically, the reason we picked this one is because lots of people have SharePoint. They have internal company data on their SharePoint site, and it may be targeted all over the SharePoint site. It may be just in a few locations, but people need access to that, and people find it hard to find, and it's all proprietary. So we wanted to show a simple example of building an expert system that allowed you to ask questions in natural English language about some sample HR data. One is to keep it low complexity as we build it, just to go through the very basics. We want to make sure that extraneous data that is irrelevant is eliminated so that you're not getting answers to your questions that you don't really care about, that might be found by Copilot 365 instead of your extended Copilot.
And I'm chuckling in the background because if you don't put a bridle and reins on Copilot, it will look through lots of things. In fact, it muddles some of your results if you let it go and search too many different sites.
Exactly. And the last part of the use case here is that you should have the ability to control authorized access to information. And we won't be going through how to set that up in this webinar, but that's a subject for a different webinar.
Yeah, there's plenty of, in fact, there's a whole certification path around using some of the data labels or sensitivity labels. So all new stuff. And by the way, if you're just starting your path in Copilot, these are kind of important tips and tricks that you'll pick up along the way. So, Jeff, there's lots of requirements. In fact, sometimes when I look at if I'm going to hire an Advisicon employee, or if you're going to staff one of your team member to tackle and dig into Copilot, it isn't just about throwing the right licenses at them. It's also about finding the right range of skill or expertise there. Talk to us a little bit more about some of the core things that you've kind of boiled down for anyone who will be building and working, with Copilot Studio.
Well, I think the main thing, there's a few things on this list are main things that they should have. They should have a license to Copilot 365, which gives you the ability to use Copilot Studio. If you have good AI knowledge from a number of other things, if you've basically had some experience with the Power Platform with tenant administration, that'd be helpful as well. But if you're hiring somebody to do this, you'd look for anywhere from entry level to senior AI skills for a Copilot Studio developer. And if they have Power Platform experience and you're using them as a tenant global administrator, they have access to one, that's very good. Managing expectations, you got to remember that this is a new emerging technology, and the user interfaces are constantly changing. The documentation is not always up to date, and there's somewhat of a frustration factor sometimes as you go through the learning curve.
Somewhat of a frustration factor. When you're in the bleeding edge, it can be a little bit maddening. As you were saying, they say it works, but it doesn't work, or they say it doesn't work, but it actually does work. So we've had a lot of conversations around this. So Jeff, I think that's a great point, which is just take a deep breath. Ride high in the saddle. There's a lot of this that's going to firm up as it goes through time, depending on when you're watching this video and what you're learning. Let's jump right in here and let's talk about using SharePoint as a knowledge source. I think that's really important because a lot of people don't realize that SharePoint is under the hood everywhere, right? So whether it's a document library or you have a wiki, you've got a SharePoint list, there's a lot of things that people are using. And some people use SharePoint to export data from ERP systems externally and make it a data repository. So lots of reasons to have documents or information stored there. I think it's going to be very natural that people are going to want to start using this very early on as part of what Copilot's ability is to find and present answers, smart answers to things. So, Jeff, take us into this.
Right. So what we did in this case is we just created your average team site, called it HR1 demo. We added a couple of document libraries, one called compensation, one called team, and they just contain one Word document each, but one's about compensation and one's about team information about what position the person has. So maybe go to the next slide there, Tim.
Perfect. And then again, it could be that these are in different sites, right? It's just saying SharePoint in general, but in this case, you've got two different libraries with two different types of information that may not let people see, so not everybody gets to see compensation information versus org chart, right? So we could be very restrictive in some areas and then maybe not in others, but that you've parsed them out in two different places.
Yeah, so we just tried to keep it very, very simple for this, and we can show more complex examples another time. So here's the two Word documents, basically the information that's in them. One's about position information and one's about compensation information. So you can see what it's got there.
So simply ours, whether you use a table in Word or a massive Excel spreadsheet, is that the document itself can also, as long as it's in that SharePoint site, be part of that data repository, right?
Right. With Excel spreadsheets, there's still some, I think, development work that needs to be done by Microsoft to make that type of information more available to Copilot, but it's coming.
Right. And I know that Fabric and other things around Power BI have a lot of options that come with it as well. Well, enough, as my wife says, enough talking, more kissing, right? So, Jeff, I won't kiss you, but let's jump in and take a look at a demo. Do you want to just kind of share your screen and walk us through kind of the building steps, what it looks like, and then how to maybe anticipate and improve that experience?
I will indeed. So give me a second to share. Okay, so here's my screen, and basically it's the home screen of Copilot Studio, and it prompts you to describe your Copilot to create it. We're not going to do that. Instead, we are just going to go straight into Create here. And we're going to create a Copilot that is a website Q&A type Copilot. You can see there's all sorts of different ones that you can choose from. we're going to choose this one. So working from a template. And then what we would want to do is we want to give it a name. So we will give it a new name. And then we'll give it a better description too.
So if you have multiple co-pilots, or especially if you're testing, I think, Jeff, you use like a numbering or a sequence convention as you kind of test and try different results as you run different co-pilots to see, did that model that you're training or working go a little bit differently? Did you get different results? Right. Any tips around that?
No, just keep the name separate and make sure you put in the description so you know what the co-pilot's about when you visit it 3 months later and you say, oh, what was I really doing here? Okay, so let's go down to knowledge here, and we look at the knowledge, and we see that we got the Microsoft site. Well, we don't really need the Microsoft site because what we're looking at is internal data. So we're going to do that. So what we'll do is we will add an internal data source, which is
I
our
see the coming
HR1.
soon on Fabric. Yep, these things just keep popping in here every time you come in. Sorry, Jeff, keep going.
Yes, okay. Add that, and HR1 demo sites in there. Okay, so once we've got our knowledge source in there, we can click create to create our Copilot.
Now, Jeff, you could do several sites, right? You could actually point them to different sites to go and pull information. Is there a limit to the number of sites you can go pull from?
Typically 4 at this point in time. 4 external, 4 internal. And that's why I put all the information on one site because of that limitation. Okay, so now we're in our Copilot. We have a welcome message over here, but let's go in and change that welcome message to something that's a little more germane to what we're doing here. So let's click on this. There's the original message. Okay, so when we change it, this save button pops up. We got to make sure that we save it.
And very similar to like workflow management, really just kind of laying it out in like any type of a flow of what pieces you're pulling, looking, writing, prompting, and asking.
Right. Now, just make sure that that worked. So we'll go and just refresh the page. Okay, and our new greeting came up. So before we start using it, let's just publish it to make sure that everything's working correctly.
If you don't publish, Jeff, what'll happen?
Publishing is typically used for deployment and updating your information that's out there. So the changes that we made would not be recognized by other copilots that were deployed out there if they were already deployed. Okay, so let's ask a question. What's the name of employee ID 001? Okay, so it's Bill Smith, employee ID 001. And let's ask another question.
Now, it cited its references. Is that correct, Jeff? You don't have to have it cite references?
You could ask it not to, I suppose, but it's sort of good to have it cite its references because especially if you've got information everywhere, like you were talking about with different sites, et cetera, you want to know where it's coming from because you want to make sure that your site, your information is actually curated information that's trustworthy, et cetera. So, okay, so it went to the one for Bill Smith because we asked about his name, and went to this one for position information for Blaise Pascal. Okay, so let's ask a slightly more complicated question here. Employee ID, let's make it employee ID 003 since we've already asked about employee ID 001.
So you're asking not just about, you're actually hitting 2 documents in this particular query, right? It's really looking at either actually 2 libraries, 2 sites, 2 documents, and compiling that information.
That's right. So what's happened here is it's come back and it's given us the information that Felicity Huff has a salary of $90,000, but it didn't give us the position of Felicity Huff. Now, sometimes you can fix that by putting in another prompt, like this one here, to tell the system what to do.
So even while you're asking the questions and you're not liking the results, you can still tell it or train it basically with the right set of questions using just natural language.
Right. So it comes back and it gives you this information here. It's looked at both documents. And Felicity Huff is a manager, but she's an HR manager. She's not a project manager. So the information isn't quite right. And the reason for that is because at this point in time, the system has not got complete access to the SharePoint information behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. In fact, it needs to be set up and registered so that it does have that. But if we go and we look at that same, let's see, that same question, and we go to our HR1 Copilot, which has been registered. Okay, we ask that question.
So the registration, Jeff, that process, making sure that it does have correct access, the thing that a lot of people are not aware of is that generative AI is not just trying to only return, binary answers. Is it this? Is it that? It's actually trying to extrapolate or look at additional documents or reference information and return results. And I think one of the things that I saw in the last prompt is that it says it may not be accurate. And part of it is when it's speculating or at least interpreting what you're asking for, regardless of where it's come from, it's actually in some cases alerting you that it may not be accurate. Is that correct?
That's right. So you've got to be careful when you're building these to make sure that it is giving you the right information back. And you can see here that just because we asked the question in one way up here, where we said for employee ID 003, what is their position, what is their salary? It came back and said it gave us their salary, but then it didn't give us any information about their position. But if we phrase that prompt slightly differently, we say for employee ID 003, what is their position and what is their salary? And it comes back and says position, employee ID 003 is HR manager, gets it right this time, and the salary is $90,000, which is right, and it cites both documents. So there's some behind the scenes stuff that we haven't completely set up in these copilots yet, which are subjects of another time, that need to be configured. So that's part of the frustration factor of dealing with a new technology, that you would think it would work perfectly, but you find its warts and its weaknesses, and you find out its strengths and weaknesses. So basically, what you need to do is be sure that you test these things, make sure it's giving you the right answers, and there's lots of behind the scenes mechanics you can implement to make sure that it in fact does that. But we wanted to point out that because we wanted to point out a real world example here. We're just asking the question one way, it gives you the right answer, but the answer slightly different, ask it a slightly different way, doesn't give you the right answer. So there you go.
Yeah, and that's a prompting for sure. Right, prompt writing, asking the right questions, or at least making sure that it's configured correctly. Something else, Jeff, I was thinking through this a little bit in terms of our end users as they begin kind of looking, saying, look, I need to connect to a local data source and begin to pull that, is start with a simple model. I mean, again, even if you already do have an HR database with 30,000 employees and all that information, great, but script it tightly, because what you're really trying to do is build and grow that semantic index, that learning model, the right permissions. And if you have a very complex set of data and it's hard for you to work through, sometimes that'll add a lot of frustration, or at least add a lot of time in that process of returning the results. And so in this case, we do the same thing, but we'll start with a very simple data set that says, get your prompt, get your security, get your access, get your registration in place. And as you begin working through that, this tool will get better. Then you can expand certainly your data or your data model. Don't just turn it on everything.
That's right. So, okay, so back over to you, Tim.
Well, I know, Jeff, one of the things that people come in is very simple is, which, hey, look, let me go and build a Copilot. Let me look directly from SharePoint and let me bring that information in. But when you're working with a local SharePoint site, basically your own SharePoint site, Jeff, I think there's some things that we'll go into a little bit more detail, like you said, in a later webinar. But I think it is important for people to know that in terms of setting this up and returning good values, that you also have to set up manual authentication. Walk us through this, Jeff, just enough so that people who are just catching the 15 minutes or 10 minutes here to kind of learn and grow, when they be able to springboard into the next section, what they can be prepared for.
Right. So basically, this is the part where I said earlier that you needed to be a tenant administrator, a global administrator, or a compliance administrator, or you needed to co-opt the help of one to do this, because this part of it has to be set up by a tenant administrator. You can see there's a number of things you have to go in and configure in here in the tenant for your application. So just go on to the next one, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's set up, this is the type of thing that you're looking for. You can see your app registrations here. You go into API permissions. And what you've done is you've gone in and you've given your Copilot access to the information in the Microsoft Graph. And these are the types of permissions that you give it through this process. And this is a little bit of back and forth between the tenant administrator and you as the Copilot Studio developer, where they go do some stuff, then back over to you, you put in the information they give you, then back to them, they do a couple of things more, then back to you, you put in the information, and then you test it. So it's not something we really had time to show in this particular webinar.
Perfect. Well, great. I'm excited. We'll continue to dig into this as well and show pitfalls as well as success factors that come into place. Well, Jeff, let's kind of bring this to a close. Talk about some of the observations, the things that we've been watching for the last 8-9 months, very specifically as Microsoft continues to build out Copilot Studio. So what are some of the key observations, things that you want people to walk away with?
Well, one of the key things is that, Copilot Studio, you get through licensing Copilot 365, which costs $30 a month, which you have to pay up front for 12 months. So off the bat, it costs you, $360. Well, maybe you don't want to deploy that for every person in your organization, because that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So instead, what you can do, you can develop these chatbots in Copilot Studio, like we just developed, and they could answer questions about anything within your SharePoint infrastructure. So you could develop expert assistants for HR, for selling things, for providing information about products that you offer, et cetera. And then you can deploy these chatbots in Microsoft Teams, and then anybody in your organization, whether they have a Copilot license or not, can use them. So that's great. One of the things you got to remember when you're developing these is garbage in, garbage out. It's going to give you good answers if it's got good information. If it doesn't have good information, it's going to give you bad answers. So also, Copilot Studio is only going to access information that's in the cloud. It doesn't see local files unless they're on OneDrive. Mm-hmm. Permissions, users will only see results based on the content that they themselves are allowed to access in the Microsoft Graph, which is a good thing, because you don't want everybody asking about the salary everybody else is making. And manual authentication is required to access internal SharePoint Online data, which is that extra step we just talked about, which is a bit of a pain for the developer, but you can see why it's necessary for security reasons.
And that's set by Microsoft. They made that. That is intentional.
That's right. And when you're specifying a knowledge source, it's a URL. It can only be a maximum of 2 levels deep. It will go deeper once you give it that level. Like the first one there, it's allowed. We'll be able to see the stuff in the dual shaft in the second one, but you cannot specify one that's more than 2 levels deep. So that's a key point.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, thanks for taking some time today. Again, the great thing that I look at Copilot is while it does look easy on the surface, in fact, actually to build sometimes looks easier, it is about the configuration, it's about the planning, it's about the security, the access and permissions. There's a lot of work, kind of like that iceberg analogy, which is really 90% is below the surface, the 10% that you see up above. So we'll definitely continue to roll these out. I hope this was helpful for all of you all today, and really taking a look at the business transformation and work management and productivity factor. If you haven't seen our other videos, check us out on YouTube. We've got about 6 or 7 years of content. And if you need PDUs, Advisicon has a free learning management portal just called thinkific.com. Some of these same videos and others happen to be there, but we can give out free PDUs for attending that as well. So Jeff, again, and for everyone else, thank you for your time. Encourage you guys to reach out if you have questions. We love pointing people in the right direction, or if you need additional assistance. These are the kind of things that we can help fast track you. So thank you for your time today, and good luck.